Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Thanks for joining us here. You made it to the threshold of the weekend, and we've got a lot to talk about on this jobs day with big concerns about the trajectory of the job market following the data that fell short this morning. Only 22,000 on payrolls, unemployment up to 4.3%, and outright losses of jobs in some key sectors, including manufacturing. President Trump was asked last evening as he dined with the titans of high tech at the White House about the veracity of the numbers and whether he would trust what we heard from BLS, knowing a month ago he fired the commissioner after not thinking that the data were correct. In fact, he suggested they were politically rigged. Here's what the president said last evening.
We have a jobs report coming out, the first since the BLS commissioner who you fired won't be there. Can you commit to saying the data will be credible?
The number, I don't know, but the real numbers that I'm talking about are going to be whatever it is, but will be in a year from now. I think you'll see job numbers that are going to be absolutely incredible. You're going to see job numbers like our country has never seen before.
I love Mark Zuckerberg having a side conversation with somebody while the president's talking to the media. The visuals were great last evening, but we want to get to the numbers here before we're joined by Representative Jason Smith, chairman of House Ways and Means. Anna Wong is with us, the chief U.S. economist at Bloomberg Economics. Anna, it's great to see you. So we need to wait a year for the golden age to begin in the job market. What do you make of this?
Well, you know, for example, next week, we finally will get some revisions for last year. So indeed, you have to wait a whole year. But I think that for today's number, there has been a historical tendency for August to undershoot consensus. When you look at where the number print in the first print relative to consensus, since 1999, 70% of the time, the initial print disappoints. And one possible explanation is that people tend to go on vacations in August, and this August the weather was beautiful in the U.S. And so the response rates for surveys tend to be lower as well. And the response rate we saw today is one of the lowest August we've seen, the lowest since 2000. So personally, I do expect this number to be revised up even within the next 2 months. Okay. And traditionally, the median upward revision in the next 2 months would be about 25,000, and the disappointment is usually about 25,000 too. So roughly offsetting by the disappointment. That means that eventually this number would be revised up possibly to 50,000, 60,000.
Didn't the last guy get fired for all this, though? The revisions and the lack of response rate?
Well, the lack of response rate has been going down for a long time, and many of these issues are long-standing and not just from one commissioner or another. So if Trump does fire the BLS commissioner, he won't get the upward revisions either.
There you go.
Anna, 50,000, even in the best-case scenario, still doesn't sound like a strong labor market. I'm going to repeat Joe's question. Even in the best-case scenario with those revisions, is this the Trump economy? Well, you know, and the unemployment rate increase, right? I think that's where the real signal is, because it's the relative labor demand and supply. And what we saw in the unemployment rate is that participation rate increased. So even though employment in the household survey actually increased over 200,000, the unemployment rate still ticked up. Because, in fact, people are coming back into the labor force after dropping out in the past 3 months. I do think that the bottom of this labor market was actually in June, and we actually have been through the really rough patch already. In fact, after all the revisions are done, we probably have a couple negative prints a couple months ago. We also probably have a negative print late last year, but I think things should be rebounding right now.
Well, that's fascinating because we hear so much about the huge levels of investment that are coming from some of the individuals who were at that dinner table last evening, but hundreds of billions of dollars in data centers alone. That's supposed to prompt a massive amount of job growth, correct? Is AI and the productivity from AI working against that?
So we are indeed estimating that the investment from AI will be continuing on this linear trajectory or even slightly non-linear in the next 2 years. So that helps with GDP growth, right? On the other hand, we are seeing a rising unemployment rate in sectors that are exposed to AI, possibly because employers are not hiring as fast. And this is what we're seeing in the demographics group from age 20 to 24, that their unemployment rate is close to 10% right now. So I think through the reduced hiring, not outright layoff, this is where ultimately through natural attrition and not replacing those workers, you're going to see slow build up, acceleration in productivity.
Wow, really interesting conversation as always with Anna Wong. Thank you, Anna, for your great analysis. And you can find Anna's work on the terminal and, of course, online at Bloomberg.com as we add the voice of Congressman Jason Smith, the Republican chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, is with us right now, live from Capitol Hill on Bloomberg TV and radio. Mr. Chairman, thank you for joining us. It's great to have you back with us here on Balance of Power. I'd love your take before we get to matters of legislation, just on the jobs print today, what it means for our economy now that the commission of BLS has been fired. Do you believe these numbers are credible?
You know, I believe that I would agree with actually the person before me. I believe the numbers should be a little bit higher than what was released today. But let's look at it just this year. In the first 8 months of the Trump administration, there's been 500,000 new jobs. And those are American jobs. Those aren't government jobs. That's real jobs. And I think it's going to have a huge impact. But as the president said in one of the prior messages that I heard, when you look at a year from now, when the growth aspects take an effect from the passage of the tax bill on July 4th, you're going to see a lot of new jobs.
Chairman Smith, the economist that was speaking before you, Anna Wong, also said, though, that some of the negative prints that have come up in the last couple of months are likely to still be negative. Those revisions still stand. If that weakness persists, is that indicative of the effect of Donald Trump's tariff policy?
I don't believe so. And I think she also said that June was probably going to be the lowest level and then it should only go up from that point on. But just passage of the big, beautiful bill of the small business deduction, the National Federation of Independent Businesses claim that tax certainty will create 1 million new jobs each year for the next 10 years. That's pretty substantial, and that's just one provision within the tax bill, and that was from the NFIB.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Mr. Chairman, because there's been a lot of writing recently about the branding, the messaging around the bill. The president himself said he doesn't want to call it Big Beautiful Bill anymore. I think the White House is looking more for something like the Working Families Tax Act or the Tax Cut Act. And I'm wondering your thought on that, having just come back from August recess, the messaging and the communication with voters that needs to follow such a massive piece of legislation passing. It's basically an opportunity to educate people on what you just did. Does it need a new brand? Does it need a new look while you take this on the road?
What it needs is for people to know what's in the bill. And that's what we have to do a better job at. We have to show how this is a tax cut for working families, such as no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, increasing the standard deduction, which is what the majority of working class families use, increasing the child tax credit to $2,200, creating the Trump accounts for new children that are born, that $1,000 will be invested for them. These different provisions, whether it's increasing a tax incentive for paid family leave or child care, these are items that need to be discussed rather than just one big broad brush. The bill, as you know, had 103 different tax provisions, which we passed through the House Ways and Means Committee, but it also had border security, it had military spending, it had welfare reform, so it was a variety of things. But just from a tax perspective, of course, these tax cuts, the majority affect working families.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask you not about only what's just been done, but what's coming up next. Mr. Chairman, there's talk of another rescissions package, for instance, because after the last one, we had a lot of Democrats come on the air here to say that they can't trust deals that are made surrounding appropriations in the House and we may well end up seeing a government shutdown. One more rescissions package, and we shut down, is what I believe Brendan Boyle said, the top Democrat on the Budget Committee. So give us your read on this. You're talking to your colleagues. Are we at risk of shutting down after September 30th?
You know, I really hate to hear that my Democrat colleague says no rescissions at all. That's saying that everything that's appropriated was needed to be spent. I don't think that's the case when you're looking at trillions of dollars. I'm sure you can find some things that aren't being spent, and we should rescind it. I am very disheartened what I've been hearing from the other side of the building, from the Senate, from Leader Schumer, from Chuck Schumer, by saying that there's going to be a shutdown. We can pass a funding bill out of the House of Representatives, and we will pass a funding bill. The issue is you have to have 60 votes in the United States Senate. There's only 52 Republicans, so that means at least 8 Democrats are going to have to join in. But if they refuse to join in, there will be a government shutdown.
Chairman Smith, it sounds like you're saying that a continuing resolution may be the only option here. How long could that last if that's the way that it moves forward?
I would expect that there'll be a continuing resolution for at least a couple months because there is clearly no bipartisan agreement on an overall appropriations process. And so a continuing resolution is what you're going to be looking at over the next several weeks. The question is, will the Democrats in the Senate support a continuing resolution? They're saying right now that they won't, but if they don't, they are clearly shutting down government.
Well, it's interesting. We're hearing talk now from the White House, not the first time, of a full year CR, a year-long CR that would bring us all the way to the next fiscal year. Mr. Chairman, does that give you the sweats when you hear that, or could that really happen?
You know, I would really like for us to do our job and to appropriate, getting tired of CRs. But that requires Republicans and Democrats to work together through this appropriations process. And hopefully people will be able to do that. But it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge. I think right now, if you were going to ask me to predict, it's going to be a CR at least for a couple months.
Well, Chairman Smith, you're talking about getting the Democrats on your side. Would you commit to more rescission packages to do that?
Well, the Democrats don't want rescission packages, as what was said earlier. I'm all about making sure you're appropriating money and you're cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, making sure that you're funding the things that should be cutting. So there's times that there needs to be rescissions. There's times that items shouldn't be rescinded. But to say a blanket across the board, no rescissions, that's not how it works up here.
We understand your position on that, Mr. Chairman. I'd love to know where you stand on Obamacare tax credits. We've got a big set of expirations, is the word I'm looking for, coming up at the end of the year. And there are questions about whether you could actually make a deal with Democrats by extending them. There are also concerns, as they call it, the Obamacare cliff at this point, about what it would mean for Republicans if they expired. Should these be renewed?
I think you look at everything when it comes to such a divided Congress is on the table, and there's a lot of negotiations throughout the whole process. I have concerns with the premium tax credits that you're referring to. The fact that if you make $600,000 in Scottsdale, Arizona, you get subsidized for your health care. That's not appropriate. And so those kind of reforms have to be maintained if there's any step moving forward on extending those credits.
Mm-hmm.
Chairman Smith, can you talk just a little bit about some of the talk we're hearing around a second reconciliation bill come October 1st? Is that a possibility?
Do you know, I've said all along that we needed to have one reconciliation bill, one big, beautiful bill, because if you look at history, there has not been a case in the history of the United States where two partisan reconciliation bills passed in the same year. That's never happened. And with these razor-thin majorities, I think it's going to be very difficult. So I'm glad that we were able to usher through the one big beautiful bill. We delivered the largest tax cut in U.S. history, the largest investment in border security in U.S. history, the most significant welfare reforms in U.S. history, just to name a few things. The second reconciliation bill, I think it'll be a whole lot more difficult to move through the system.
Well, I can only imagine going through that exercise once again, even though you can, doesn't mean you should. Jason Smith, it's great to have you back, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for joining us. He chairs the Ways and Means Committee in the Republican-led House, with us live from Capitol Hill here on Bloomberg TV and radio. They're going to head back home, Kriti, and come back next week to some pretty interesting challenges. As you mentioned, what are we down to, a dozen legislative days to figure this all out?
Absolutely. And the clock is ticking. It's still unclear if there's any way out of this.
That's true, as we just proved. I think in another conversation about this whole deal, Democrats and Republicans are going to have to get in a room at some point and figure their way forward here. And they're running out of time. September 30, the end of the fiscal year. Alongside Kriti Gupta, I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. We'll assemble our political panel next. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, only here on Bloomberg.
Stay with us on Balance of Power. We'll have much more coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Washington and New York City are colliding again. Doesn't really have to do with Wall Street this time, but in fact, the mayor's race. And Donald Trump is investing himself. We've talked about this a bit. With reports, it began as reports this week, that he might urge a couple of candidates, you've heard of them both, including the sitting mayor of New York, Eric Adams, convince them to drop out of the race, Curtis Sliwa the other, the Republicans, so we could get this down to a one-on-one, right? A two-way race between Cuomo and Mamdani, who probably got quite a kick out of this story. He was asked about it earlier this week in New York. Listen.
Today's news that the White House is considering job offers for Eric Adams and Curtis Sliwa. It is not news that carries meaning because of any impact it will have on this race. We feel just as confident as we did yesterday that we will win this race in November. This is, however, about an affront to our democracy. An affront to what makes so many of us proud to be Americans. That we choose our own leaders.
It's interesting, Kriti, because Donald Trump doesn't appear to be backing down from these reports. And he actually talked about this when he was asked. He's maybe looking for a job for Eric Adams at Housing and Urban Development, maybe in Saudi Arabia. Did you see this report?
I mean, the New York Times talking about a potential ambassadorship.
Yeah.
Has Eric Adams been to Saudi Arabia?
I don't know. They talk about Turkey a lot, but let's hear from Donald Trump. He actually got into this just last evening when he was at the table with the tech titans. Here's what the president said.
Are you urging or encouraging any candidates in the New York City mayor's race to drop out, to clear the field?
No, I don't like to see a communist become mayor, I will tell you that. And I don't think you can win unless you have one-on-one, because somehow he's gotten a little bit of a lead. I have no idea how that happened, but I'd prefer not to have a communist mayor of New York City. And, you know, that's what he is based on his policy, if you look at his statements in the past. So I would like to see two people drop out and have it be one-on-one. And I think that's a race that could be won.
Generating a flurry of headlines. Trump wants two-way race for New York City mayor. Adams considering dropping out of race after secret meeting in Florida. Talks between Adams and Trump advisors center on Saudi ambassadorship. Apparently, Eric Adams will be in town next week now, according to the New York Post. Is going to sit down with Steve Witkoff to talk about next steps. Got to play this to the panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us now, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Jeannie is in New York as we speak, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, our Republican strategist. As the Democrat on the panel here, Jeannie, I don't know your thoughts of Donald Trump removing the Republican candidate from this race, but where is this going? Will the president of the United States dictate the next mayor of New York?
That is what Mamdani says he is trying to do, and it is stunning. I will tell you, the local media here had something of a mini field day because the mayor was supposed to have a press conference that got canceled. Not that there was any direct tie between this, but of course, every little move he makes now is watched to see, is he going to be announcing he's out of this race or suspending his campaign? I think what's so stunning is that most of us thought that Mamdani was something of a gift to the Republicans, like this was going to be the Republican foil. He is the new Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi or AOC, and Republicans will be running against him for the next several election cycles. And yet what do we see is we see Donald Trump saying, nope, we want him out, which is quite stunning. And I thought it was interesting that Donald Trump has now recategorized him. He is no longer a democratic socialist. He is now a communist. But I guess we can't let little semantics get in the way.
Rick, weigh in here and maybe explore the hypothetical with us if you can. If this does ultimately become a one-on-one race with Andrew Cuomo versus Zohran Mamdani, does Andrew Cuomo have a shot here?
Well, assuming that the Sliwa and Adams have probably somewhere between 25 and 30% of the vote, that shift makes a difference, right? I mean, that would be a material impact on the race if it all went to Cuomo. The problem is we don't know if they're all going to go to Cuomo. A lot of them are going to probably just stay at home. A lot of Republicans who back Sliwa are never going to vote for Cuomo. They're never going to vote for Mamdani, so they're not going to vote. So it's kind of hard. It's very much a moving average, right? But without them out of the race, there's no chance Mario Cuomo can win. And so it's really just a shot in the dark at this stage. You've got, only a few months left before the election. This is going to take some time to sort of play its way out as far as getting these folks out. And a lot of attention on Adams and this offer potentially to become an ambassador or something like that. Yeah. But we're not hearing much about Sliwa, who's got more support than Adams does. And he's already said, I don't want a job. Which would make sense. Right. So how do you get him out of the race? Because he's really probably the more important candidate to move out of there than Adams at this stage, just because of the basis of he's got twice as much support.
Curtis Sliwa got the whole makeover and everything. He's not going to drop out of the race now, I'm guessing, right? By the way, I'm guessing Andrew Cuomo would love to get some Mario Cuomo signs up there. I know we're both old, Rick, but Andrew Cuomo, of course, who we're talking about here. But I'm curious, Rick, Jeannie touched on something important. I thought Mamdani was the foil that Donald Trump wanted for the next couple of years. Do you believe his intentions here?
Not really. I mean, look, you got to understand. And by the way, sorry for that Mario slip. I've been fighting him, for most of my career, so he's still embedded in my brain. Donald Trump has a lot of his business in New York. He has a lot of assets in New York. He is a Floridian now, but his entire life has been defined by New York. And I do think there is an aspect to that is, all his friends, a lot of the people sitting around at dinner last night, have homes in New York. They don't want to see a socialist, as Jeannie puts it, put in as mayor. And so, we're going to have a time of our life if he becomes mayor, and we can talk about this leftist surge inside the Democratic Party, and it'll be very hard for Democrats to run away from their largest city mayor in the country. But at the end of the day, it's bad for New York City. Donald Trump knows that. So I think a lot of what's motivating him is to, do no harm to New York City, his assets, his businesses, his friends' businesses. I mean, it could be having a dramatic effect on his opinion about what to do about this race.
Jeannie, weigh in here. Again, explore the hypothetical with me. If Eric Adams is no longer in the race and he is being considered for many roles within the cabinet, whether it's at HUD or whether it's in Saudi Arabia, would Eric Adams make a good ambassador? What do you think?
Well, he hasn't made a very good mayor. So maybe it would be a better job for him than the mayoralty. He was subject not long ago to public corruption charges that Donald Trump's DOJ pulled back on, and those were dropped. So this is somebody with a record. This is somebody who has had, a lot of serious charges brought against him. By the way, Andrew Cuomo as well. Certainly neither of them found guilty or anything like that, although Governor Cuomo did, leave his very important post as a result. I would say a lot of this is being driven by polls, which show that if it's a two-way race, Andrew Cuomo certainly can be competitive with, even one poll showing him beating Mamdani. That said, he lost to Mamdani in the primary by double digits. I would also say there is a very serious concern, I would think, amongst Donald Trump and many people in the administration, that the financial capital of the world would be, certainly America, but the world as well, would be run by somebody who describes themselves as a democratic socialist and has policies that are very, very out of the norm of what we have seen in the United States. There was a very interesting study, he talks about no need for billionaires, but roughly half of the income tax in New York City is paid for by the top 2%. Imagine what that would do to New York City if those people flee, and flee they might. So there's a very real, serious economic repercussions to all of this, depending on if he does win. And he certainly could win if things stay as they are now.
Well, President Trump is not only weighing in on the New York mayoral race, he's weighing in on what will be a barn burner of a congressional race now that Jerry Nadler has decided to not run for re-election. And he's on Truth Social about this too, Rick Davis. The president writes, I'll be careful here, but this is the president. Jerry Nadler, one of the most disgusting congressmen in USA history, is at long last calling it quits. He's finally leaving Congress. I've been beating this bum, he says, for 40 years. First as a New York City developer where he opposed me for no reason at every corner, but could never stop me from getting the job done. He goes on to talk about then running against him as president, where this psychopathic nut job together with crazy Nancy Pelosi impeached me twice and lost. I could keep going. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV, you see it's a pretty long post here. Rick, we've got less than a minute. Will Donald Trump be stumping in New York for these two races?
He may stump if there's a decent Republican in the Nadler district, which may be irrelevant because it's a pretty Democratic district. And you can tell, Nadler should be very happy that he has had such a big impact on the psyche of Donald Trump. That's pretty impressive.
He calls him a lightweight in the same post. I don't know. We got to pick one. Rick, thank you. Jeannie, thank you. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. We always learn something with these two. An important conversation ahead with Austin Goolsbee, only here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Stay with us on Balance of Power. We'll have much more coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
I'm Joe Mathieu. Yes, indeed, alongside Kriti Gupta in Washington. Great to have you with us on the Friday edition of Balance of Power. Jobs Day, and a lot of questions about the trajectory of our economy as we head for the next Fed meeting here. And Kriti, there are concerns about a slowdown in the job market, which may well justify the interest rate cuts that President Trump has been pushing for.
There's the slowdown. We knew we were kind of getting on the off-ramp of hiring anyway.
Yeah.
But the margin of that off-ramp is really what's surprising here. The estimate was 75,000. We're getting 22,000. We had Anna Wong earlier come and talking to us about the fact that we might actually get an upward revision. But even, say, 50,000, which was her best-case scenario,
yes,
doesn't sound too juicy.
You'd still be short, I guess, technically, of the estimate in this particular particular case. I'm glad to say that we're joined today in Washington by Michael McKee. He's been down for a couple of days with the Stephen Myron hearing, and now for an important conversation that we're going to bring you with Austan Goolsbee, of course, the president of the Fed Reserve Bank of Chicago. Michael is Bloomberg's international economics and policy correspondent, and this is the day before the blackout period starts. So this is the last we're going to hear.
We got about 10 hours to go, so we're hoping that we can squeeze in 9.5 with Austan here to get the full view of what the Fed is thinking.
Well, what's on your mind as you read the data this morning? The White House is framing this as kind of a one-off, even though last time we got a bad jobs report, the BLS commissioner was fired. Michael, how do we interpret this?
Well, that's an improvement, I suppose, in the White House response.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't blame him. It's the same thing for any party. When the news is bad, you try to spin it as good. In this case, the news is bad, but the president may get what he was looking for. It's not the reason he wants to get what he was looking for, but it's likely he's going to get interest rate cut. So, I mean, we'll ask President Goolsbee about that in a few minutes. Sure. But it seems like Jay Powell set the stage for that, and these numbers certainly ratify that decision.
There were still questions, though, about just kind of hiring pauses or freezes that we saw where we did have that negative revisions number. Are we expecting a bounce back here? If this is a one-time data set, does it get better from here?
There is a lot of theorizing that it probably will, that maybe this is kind of the low period right now, that once the uncertainty over tariffs lifts some more and the stimulus from the big, beautiful bill starts to flow into the economy, that company investment will pick up and that maybe some of this will rebound, but we don't know for sure.
Well, it's a great pleasure to have you with us here in Washington, and of course, President Goolsbee in Chicago. Michael, why don't you take it away? We're going to be watching and listening.
All right. We'd like to welcome Austan Goolsbee to our broadcast of Balanced Power here on Bloomberg Television and on radio worldwide. Austan, you heard us talking here, 22,000 jobs, 4.3% unemployment. How's that economy of yours holding up?
Well, you know, you never make too much of any one month, but it's definitely below what we would consider the break even for job growth. The only thing I want to highlight is we're getting some cross currents in the data, and so we want to be careful thinking about where we are in the business cycle. We know that in 2024 and going back into 2023 as well, when immigration was high, we were getting jobs numbers of 185,000 a month, which was faster than the break even, but it wasn't a very good indication of where we were in the business cycle. And that could be at work in these numbers too, that they could be artificially lower than the break even because immigration's going the other way and labor supply the other way. So for me, I like looking at a broader portfolio of numbers, and I think things that are rates and ratios prove to be a little more accurate as indicators of business cycle last year. Those include the unemployment rate, the layoff rate, the vacancy rate, the hiring rate, and you see some stability on those.
You've called them the four horsemen of the labor market.
Yeah, the four horsemen of truth on the labor market. Yeah.
The labor market does seem, though, to have deteriorated some. Does this report today basically lock in a rate cut for September 17th?
You know the rules. I'm not allowed to speak for the rest of the Fed, the FOMC. I'm only speaking for myself. I want to get more information. I'm still undecided as we're going into this. If it looks like the labor market is deteriorating on grounds more than just the monthly payroll numbers, because I want to emphasize again, when you have population growth changing around behind the scenes, just the aggregate monthly payroll growth is not a great indicator of the business cycle. If we start to see deterioration across all the four horsemen of truth in the labor market, the unemployment rate, the hiring rate, if we were to start seeing layoffs, then I think we would be nervous on the employment side of the mandate. But we can't disregard, we got to look at the inflation side too. And the more mild numbers we get on inflation, the better I'll feel about just focusing on the labor market. But in the last inflation reports, we also had this uptick in inflation coming from services. So I think we want to make sure that that's more of a blip and not a more ominous indicator.
Well, let me ask this, because you'll be in the blackout when we get the CPI report next week, what would it take for you to hold off on a rate cut in terms of an inflation result?
I don't. It's not going to be a specific number. If you saw X number, then you would change. It would be, we're trying to get the through line of where the economy is, and one side of that shows relative weakness in the job market, at least measured by monthly payroll. More stability, looking at more accurate measures, and then on the other side, if the inflation numbers come in and they give some indication that the inflation from tariffs is not looking to be persistent, or that the uptick in inflation on services, again, does not look to be persistent, looks to be more like it was just a temporary blip in the data, then that would provide comfort to me that we're still on what I was calling the golden path, and that rates can come down a fair amount.
Well, the administration thinks that you've fallen off the path. The universal response from administration officials today, including the president, is that you're still too late, that you should have been cutting earlier.
Factually, yes, that is what they said. I mean, my view is we go to the FOMC meeting and we look at the data and the economic outlook as best we can to figure out the through line. A lot of people outside the FOMC have a lot of opinions, but the independence of the monetary authority from political interference is critically important if we don't want inflation to come back.
Well, for the economy's sake, are you behind the curve?
It depends what you make of what the through line is on the economy. So, as I say, if you take the payroll employment numbers, they show weakness. If you take the open job vacancy rate or you look at the layoff rate, they don't show weakness. They show pretty stable full employment kind of values, sort of where they were, or sometimes even better than they were pre-COVID in what was a pretty tight labor market. And on the inflation side, we've had some really benign readings, which would not give you any indigestion on that side. But we now have at least one report where you see services inflation bumping up, and services inflation is not a thing that would likely be coming from tariffs. So it would tend not to be a one-time cost increase. So we got some currents that we have to balance out here, and that's fine. This is what always happens. There are conditions change. The central bank is supposed to be the steady hand, and there's political argument and there are market arguments, up, down, sideways. They have a lot of variability, and as I say, we're supposed to be taking the steady hand and figuring out the through line.
Well, the president's argument seems to be, at least the way he was talking last night, as, these numbers may be bad, but kind of channeling his inner Brooklyn Dodger fandom. He said, wait till next year. Next year, when all these tech palaces are built, we're going to see hiring like crazy. You've got to put in a new forecast for unemployment and for inflation at the next meeting. Do you see a rebound ahead and stronger economic growth and employment growth in 2026?
Yes. I mean, I think to me, until we get more convincing evidence, otherwise, I still think we're most likely in a kind of a full employment space where we're generating jobs and the economy continues to grow. This slowdown in payroll employment, the aggregate jobs number, as I say, you got to be extremely careful taking that as an indicator of the business cycle when things like immigration or labor supply and labor force participation are moving around behind the scenes. So to the extent that anybody's saying they think it's a strong job market and the job market may get even stronger going into 26, that's entirely a possibility. And that if it is, to me, that's still on the golden path that we're around stable full employment.
We can't, unfortunately, avoid politics in these situations these days. Just a few hours ago, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent came out with quite a broadside against the Fed in the Wall Street Journal, laying out a lengthy bill of particulars against the central bank. Your research is bad. Your forecasts are bad. You've contributed greatly to income inequality. You've destroyed the housing market, blurred the lines between fiscal and monetary policy, and created a culture in Washington where policymakers rely on the Fed to bail them out after they make poor fiscal choices. Are these criticisms fair or unfair?
Look, that's for the American people or the pundits or somebody to decide. Like I say, what we do at the Federal Open Market Committee is go down there as a collection and do what the law requires us to do. That is, set monetary policy based on maximizing employment and stabilizing the prices. At a moment like this, where we're getting shocks that are pushing us in a stagflationary direction, driving down employment and driving up prices simultaneously, that's a difficult environment for the central bank to be in. I've been in the Fed for coming on 3 years, so I don't know about the long historical litany of complaints that someone might have. Overall, we just go there and do our job. That's what the law requires us to do. And so I'm not going to get into a political argument about it.
Well, let me ask it this way. One of the criticisms he makes is that the Fed has a gain of function problem. In other words, since the great financial crisis, you've had a lot of tools to the toolbox, including quantitative easing, forward guidance, things like that. And the Fed also strayed into climate change. You've heard those arguments before, and other things like that. The fate idea for inflation. Are any of those valid? And is anybody at the Fed working on whether or not they have worked as you hoped and should be kept in the toolbox?
Well, yes, people are working and thinking about that all the time, both at the Fed and among economic researchers, monetary researchers around the country. As I say, these are a bunch of things that are from the years before I was at the Fed. I'm certainly not going to speak to them. I don't have any privileged information about how those were determined. I think on overall dual mandate grounds, you have to say that as you look at 2023 and 2024, we've got the inflation. We're coming off a period where inflation was well higher than the 2% inflation target. But we succeeded in getting inflation down almost as much as it has ever fallen in a single year. And for the first time ever in the United States and probably of any rich country in the world, we had that massive of drop of inflation without having a recession, without the unemployment rate rising dramatically. And that's what we should be trying to do. That is absolutely our goal, to carry out the golden path and to continue to carry it out now. And that involves figuring out the through line of where we are in the economy, not overreacting to 1 month's report or 2 weeks, what happened in the market 2 weeks ago. The law is very clear. The FOMC stabilizes prices, maximizes employment. Doesn't say anything about make administrations happy, make the stock market happy. None of those are in the mandate. Congress has given us the mandate.
You know, they might want to change that mandate down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Ultimately, Treasury Secretary Bessent says what's at stake is the Fed's credibility and political legitimacy. Have you seen signs, or has anybody suggested to you that either of those have diminished?
No, I agree with those sentiments. The credibility of any central bank, and the Fed especially, is critically important. So that when you go through episodes like happened coming out of COVID, where inflation goes way up, but if you look at market expectations of what inflation would be in the future, people believed the Fed when it said we're going to get inflation back down to 2%. That is a sacred covenant between a central bank and the American public, that it's going to do the job as the law requires it. So everyone I know involved with the Fed system is open to criticisms, critiques, and analyses of models. How can they be improved? Of forecasts, of the Fed tools. All of those things should be on the table. We should have an adult conversation about those. How can we improve our decision making? That's something different than should there be political interference with the setting of monetary policy? Should the central bank not be independent? And I'm totally opposed to taking away the independence of the central bank, as are unanimously all economists that I know of, because just look at places where there is not central bank independence. Inflation comes back. Growth is slower. Unemployment is worse. So we really don't want to go there. And I don't think that's what they're calling for.
Unfortunately, I have to ask you one more question. Stephen Myron looks like he will be joining you at the 16th and 17th of September meeting. He had some nice things to say about you in his paper on Fed reform last year. Was your appointment sinister? Does he have a point about a revolving door between political administrations and people who are on the Fed?
Look, I'm not going to get into policy. He said my appointment was sinister. I served in an administration, and some 12 years later, I joined the Fed. So I think it's a little strange to call that a revolving door. But I look forward to meeting Stephen Myron, and I'm proud he's coming from the Council of Economic Advisors, which was he had the same job I had 12 years before I joined the Fed. And there's a long history of CEA folks coming over to the Fed and doing a very effective job. I think anybody who comes and joins the FOMC is going to take the job very seriously. It's an important function, and we all just go down there and try to maximize employment, stabilize prices. That's what the law says.
Well, Austin Goolsbee, thank you very much for being diligent enough to come talk to us, and hopefully you'll talk to us shortly after the next meeting. I suspect it's going to be a very interesting meeting. Austin Goolsbee from the Chicago Fed, president of the Chicago Fed, former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, as he noted, someone with a vast experience in Washington and in monetary policy.
Sinister, huh? Interesting that he has not made up his mind yet. This meeting is days away.
Well, I kind of wonder. I mean, we don't have time to really go into depth with him, but I was wondering what other indicators he was expecting. Right. There'll be another jobless claims report, but that's about it in terms of the labor market between now and the meeting. I think if you read between the lines, he's saying he's open to a rate cut as long as inflation doesn't come in bad. Mm-hmm.
The piece on the labor market that I thought was crucial, he said, well, there's no layoffs just yet. That would be the alarm bell they're ringing. But anecdotally, we've heard of these hiring freezes, hiring pauses on Wall Street, in the tech space as well. Is it just a matter of time? Is that kind of where Austin Goolsbee is leading us?
Well, we're kind of at an inflection point. We don't know which way it's going to tip. Companies have been telling Fed officials for quite some time that they are on hold. They don't know what's going to happen to the economy, so they're not hiring. They're not adding to their expenses. We're starting to see some companies say we need to trim because the uncertainty just goes on. Mm-hmm. But do they start to trim a lot of people? That's the issue. The Fed watches the unemployment rate because it tends to, as Claudia Sahm always says, tends to start going up fast once it starts going up. And it went up for the last 2 months in a row. So if that continues, then we might see that. But we just don't know yet.
Well, real pleasure to have you playing into Balance of Power today, and thank you for bringing us that important conversation. Michael McKee, always a pleasure to have you in Washington.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.